everyone. Welcome to another Lunch and Learn at the Putnam County Library. We are here with Gordon Fraser to talk about coming to America. Take it away.
Thank you. This all happened because I happened to be in the library one day after our January conversation, and the librarian said, "Oh, would you be interested in coming back and doing another talk?" And I said, "Well, for goodness sake, what do you want me to talk about?" And she said, "Anything, whatever you want to talk about." And I suppose it's because we've seen so much on the news, on television and so forth about the southern border and what have you. The thought popped into my mind, coming to America would be interesting to people. So we're here to talk about coming to America. Now, as you folks can see, we have something up on the map, and just ignore that because that will be in the last 5 or 10 minutes of our talk. But I do want to talk a little bit about why, over the years, people have come to America. We start out pretty much, if you forget about the Vikings, that's not for sure, but we start out with the Pilgrims in 1600. Why did they come to America? They were Puritan and they wanted their own religion and they didn't want anyone interfering with them. So they said, we have to get out of England and we'll go to America where we can have our own religion and life. That's fine. There were Dutch people from Amsterdam and that area who did the same thing. They came there and they came to the New York area and settled there, again, for freedom of religion and freedom of expression of what they felt. Well then, from then on, typically, there are people who decide they need to get out of where they are. If you have noticed, if any of you are part of the theater-going crowd, just up the street from where we are right now is CPAC, Cookeville Performing Arts Center. They have just finished doing a magnificent production of Fiddler on the Roof. Well, if you're familiar with the play Fiddler on the Roof, you know that it is based on the fact that the Russian government expels Jewish people from their homes. They give them a week's notice and say, get rid of your cows, get rid of your homes, get rid of your furniture, you're gone. And they make them get out. Well, a lot of those people, history has shown, is that some went to Germany, some went to other parts of Europe, and a number of them came to America, where they could be free to have the kind of life they wanted to have. I'm sure that all of you have seen old-time movies where you see this old tramp steamer coming into port in New York and all these people in black clothes and hunched over and so forth getting off the boat in New York. At that point, they were in America for good. No one challenged them, no one stopped them. You got off the boat and you were in America. And this went on for over 100 years. Now, ultimately, that changed. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But we have to look, and I have to talk about why my family came to America. So again, we have to go back in time a little bit. My grandmother was born in the 1860s, and she had a younger sister. And while my grandmother married a coal miner and had 5 children with him, this other lady, my Aunt Kitty, as I knew of her, I never knew her, she got a job in the home of a lord, if you will. Are you all familiar with the program Downton Abbey?
Yes.
Okay, that's where there's the big mansion house and a whole group of outside workers and inside maids, and the butler is the head man, and the lady in charge, the housekeeper, is the lady in charge of all of them. Well, my Aunt Kitty was a housekeeper in one of these homes. And Aunt Kitty decided one day, I don't know why, no one ever talked about it. My grandmother never mentioned it, and she was the only one that knew her. But Aunt Kitty decided one day there had to be more to life than looking after somebody else's house. And so she said, I'm going to go to America. And so she took the boat, got to New York, and don't ask me why, again, I can't tell you, I don't know. But she got on a train in New York and went to Detroit. Now you ask me, why would anybody in like 1890 to 1900 era go to Detroit? Well, the answer is, I think, my own opinion, very simple. Random Olds was busy building his Oldsmobile. Henry Ford was busy building his Model T. The Dodge brothers were working for Ford until they went out to do their own manufacturing of an automobile. There was a man by the name of Nash who had the Nash Automobile Company, which today is Jeep. So Detroit in that era was a boom town. Henry Ford had said, I'm going to pay my workers $5 a day, and that was unheard of. So Detroit was booming, and apparently Aunt Kitty went to Detroit to find work. Well, she did, she found work. Now, are any of you familiar with Russell Stover candy?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had a factory over here in Allard until about 10 years ago. Well, Aunt Kitty got a job in a chocolate factory, making chocolates. Take a piece of caramel, dip it by hand into molten chocolate and set it aside to dry. That's how they did it back then. And that's the job that she got. Well, she was an intelligent woman. She was a hard worker. She got promotions. And one day she sat down and wrote a letter back to England and to my grandmother's eldest child. And she said to this lady, your husband is an intelligent man with an education. He is wasted working in the coal mine office. He should come to America. So they talked about it as a family, and it was decided that Uncle Andrew would come to America, and if things worked out, then he'd bring his children back over, and his wife. So he came to America, got a job in the chocolate factory, and we talk about the American dream. My Uncle Andrew came to America with basically nothing. He wound up as the chief executive officer of the candy company. He wound up as being the first person in that family to buy his own home, the first person in that family to buy his own car, and the first person in that family to have his children educated in a college. So he was a success, and of course he brought his kids and wife over. Well, that worked out well enough that they sent back to get Uncle Peter, who was the next eldest child in the family. And when I met Uncle Peter for the first time, he had just retired from Mobil Oil. He had his own home, his own car, and his children had been put through college. Well, okay, it continued, the third person, the fourth person, until the only part of my grandmother's family that was left in England was my grandmother and my mom and my dad and I. So in 1937 came a letter from America. Grandma, you should come to America. And Grandma said, I will not go to America. Why? I've been to the movies, and I know when you get past a place called Pittsburgh, there's nothing but desert and Indians. Well, shortly thereafter came another letter from America, and this I do remember. I have this in my mind. Grandma opened the envelope and took out an 8.5 by 11 glossy, professionally done photograph of a 4-door sedan sitting on a showroom floor. And it was obviously the most wonderful looking automobile I have ever seen, as I thought at the time. And there's a note, Grandma, this is my new car and we have paved roads to drive it on. Come and visit. So Grandma said, all right, I'll go for 3 weeks. Look at it this way, it's going to take a week to get here, a week to get home, and 3 weeks. That's going to be her trip. There's a change had taken place since the original people came. In my grandmother's day, and even in mine, you have to get a visa. It is a document from the government that allows you to come into their country. I have an American passport, and in my passport, I have a visa for Morocco, and I have a visa for China. Okay? My grandmother got a visa to come to America, and it was good for 6 months. Grandma came to America, got with her family, and stayed 6 months until they had to put her out because the visa had expired. She came home, and again, I can remember this just as clearly as not. Now this is early 1938. She says to my mom and dad, "You need to start saving your money, get that boy to America." Well, that wasn't as easy as it sounds, because my mother had 4 siblings in America with all of their children, her nieces and nephews and so forth. My dad's family was different. My grandfather and grandmother Fraser, my dad's brothers, Uncle Bob, Uncle Charlie, Uncle George, all of their wives and all of their kids all lived within 3 miles of where we lived. And my whole dad's family was there. So they hemmed and hawed and talked about it. And at some point, my dad said, "All right, Isabel, all right, Belle, if you want to go to America, we'll go to America." And they started saving their money, and it wasn't in time because World War II started and we couldn't travel. So World War II is over in the spring. World War II. The German portion of World War II is over in May of 45. And my mom and dad and I get on the train, go down to London, go to the British Embassy, or the American Embassy, pardon me, and we walk in and we say, "Hi, we'd like to go to America." And they say, "Yeah, so does everybody else." There was a waiting list that we didn't know about. Now again, American government changes had taken place, okay? The Congress decided, and I don't know the numbers, you can look them up on the computer if you want to do so. The American government had said, "We're going to allow X number of people per year to come into America." Who will it be? Well, they went back to a census, and they looked, and one of the questions on the census was, "Where is your nation of origin?" And people put down England, France, Germany, Ireland, all those, and they said, "All right, if it's 20% English, then of this group that we'll allow, 20% will be from England, 10% will be from Ireland, 15% will be from Italy," wherever the numbers worked out, that's how it would be. So now we're on a waiting list, and in April of 47, we get word from the embassy that we can now have a visa to immigrate to America. I have my English passport, and you might find it interesting to look at, and I will pass it around. But inside, it has my picture as a 16-year-old, and it says, "Occupation office boy." And I want to let me dissect for a moment and talk about that. The English school system is such that you go to school 12 months out of the year. And there's no summer break like we have here. So people graduate high school at the age of 14. I graduated high school at the age of 14. One of the requirements of graduation back in my day, and I presume it's still the same, is you have to take a test. You have to document that you can read. You have to document that you can write a response to what you've read. You have to document that you can multiply, divide, add, and subtract. You have to document that you know your English history. Which kings did what and when. You have to document you know geography. Now, again, forgive me, I was born in England and there's still a little bit of something in the back of my head about England. If you looked at a map of the world in 1947 or thereabouts, you'll see that England is colored in a pink shade. Okay? There is a saying from that era: the sun never sets on the British Empire. And what it meant was that somewhere in the world, no matter what time it was in England, the sun was shining somewhere. Think about it. Canada, the British West Indies, Rhodesia in Africa, Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholarships. He was an Englishman and they named an African country for him. That's changed since, but nevertheless. South Africa, get into the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii. Did you ever see the Hawaiian flag? The Hawaiian flag in the upper corner where our Stars and Stripes has stars, has the Union Jack of England because it was English. Hong Kong. When Joanne and I were in Hong Kong, it was still a British territory and changing over to being Chinese, but nevertheless, Hong Kong was English, Burma was English. Wherever you went in the world, at whatever time, somewhere the sun was shining on English territory. So, why I say that, I just throw it in for your interest's sake. But nevertheless, we started out with, we're going to go to America because we've now gotten our visas and we can go. And in my passport, as I will pass it around, you will see that on this page it says immigration visa, quota number, and the March date on which we were given a visa to come to America. On the next page, you will see that it says U.S. Department of Justice admitted May 23rd, 1947. And that proves that I got to America. Okay, and I'll pass that, and then you folks can pass it over to the next row. But we did do all of that, and we went from our home, and you might remember this, the rest of the folk may not. As I was leaving the town that I lived in, my best buddy, Ken Moore, Ken said to me, "Gordon, give me your Mickey Mouse watch. You're going to America where you can get anything you want." And the Mickey Mouse watch had come as a birthday present during the war years, and it was nobody in the city of Gates that I ever knew had a Mickey Mouse watch, just me. I gave it to Ken, and I gave him my blessing with it. But anyhow, we got to Southampton, we got aboard the boat, and it happened to be the Queen Elizabeth. That was not our choice, it was just how it was set up by the travel agency. I don't remember what was the first meal we had on board ship, but I do remember this. We sat down at the table, and in front of us was a plate, and the plate was full of slices of white bread. We had not seen white bread since October of 1939. And here it is, May of 1947. And that was the first time we'd seen white bread. And beside it was a bowl with a pile of butter. And we had been on 4 ounces of butter per week per person. And there had to be a pound of butter there, just for us. So it was a wonderful start to the trip. Well, 5 days later, we're getting to America, and I got up, I set my clock, and I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I went out on deck and stood there and watched as the boat sailed by the Statue of Liberty. And that's an experience, believe me, that is really wonderful to see that and to know that you finally are there. Well, we got off the boat, got a cab, got to New York Central Railroad Station, got a train, and headed for Detroit. Well, the boat had docked on the morning tide, so they had not served breakfast for us. And we had been told there would be a dining car aboard ship, And so we asked, and they gave us directions, and sure enough, we went to the dining car and found an empty table. My mom and dad and I sat down. A few minutes later, this man in a pair of black pants and a white jacket, he was obviously the waiter, walked by and threw a pencil and pad of paper down on the table. What's going on here? What do we do now? And a man sitting across the aisle from us said, he's waiting for you to write down what you want for breakfast. And my dad, God bless him, my dad said, well, there's no menu on this table. What can we order? The typical American response, you can have whatever you want, just write it down. Well, Dad did, and the next time by, the waiter picked it up and went on to the kitchen. It took about 5 minutes, and he came back with a tray and set down 3 plates, 2 eggs, 4 rashers of bacon, 2 slices of white bread toast, a pot of strawberry jam, I didn't know what that was, and 4 cups of tea. And that was my first meal in America. So anyhow, we continued on, got to Detroit. Our family met us. They'd found a place we were going to live with an aunt until they found a place for us to live. So that all worked out very well. My dad got a job the first week we were there as a meat cutter for Kroger's. My mother got a job in a store in downtown Detroit, B. Siegel Company. It was considered to be the best women's clothing store this side of Chicago. And I got a job as a butcher boy in a supermarket, filling the counter and doing the odd jobs around. So we're working, right? Well, after about 2 weeks, a lady came into the store and my mother was waiting on her and talking about, you girls will understand this, what kind of material, what style, what length, the whole kind of thing about what kind of coat she wanted to buy. And the lady said to my mother, you have an accent. Where are you from? And my mother said, oh, we're here from England. We've been here 2 weeks. And the lady said, well, that's not long, but how do you like America after 2 weeks? And my mother said, oh, we like it fine, but I'm worried about my son. And the lady said, why are you worried about your son? She said, well, he's been here 2 weeks and he hasn't found a church yet. Understand, please, my mother and father, the only time I ever saw them in church was when Joanne and I got married. They did not go to church. But I, during the war years, started going to a Church of England church because it had an organization like Boy Scouts. Only it was a little bit more militaristic. We had uniforms and we drilled and we practiced and all this sort of thing. And I joined this organization. So I had to be in there. You were required to go to church every Sunday. So I went to church every Sunday. And my mother said that I hadn't found a church yet. And again, God sits on people's shoulders and they don't know it sometimes. The lady said, oh, where do you live? And my mother told her. And she said, that's interesting. My husband is a Methodist minister, and our church is only 6 blocks up the street from where you live. Send Gordon there on Sunday morning, and I will have people meet him. So, come Sunday morning, I went to Norden Park Methodist Church and met some boys my age, and one of them, Alan Scott, became a really good friend. I ran with Alan for about 3 years. So, okay, a couple of months go by, and Alan comes to me one day and he says, Gordon, I belong to the Boy Scouts here at church, and the Scout troop goes on a trip every summer. And it's the Scoutmaster and 4 Scouts in his car, and the Scoutmaster and 4 Scouts, the Assistant Scoutmaster and 4 boys in his car. So it's 8 boys. One of them has just had to drop out and we're leaving in 2 weeks. I asked the Scoutmaster, would you let Gordon Fraser come. Well, people at the church had found out that there was a new boy from England there and all this sort of stuff. And so the scoutmaster said, sure, Gordon can come if he wants to. So they asked me, and I said, yes, I will go. So what we had to do was get a sleeping bag, and on this trip we were going to sleep out every night. So there was nothing but gasoline and food to pay for on this trip. So we left Detroit. Now I've put this up on the map for you, just to, I'm sure you know, but I just want to make it simple. Here's Detroit. We went to Chicago, which is here. We went on up through Illinois, through Wisconsin, and into Minnesota. Somewhere in Wisconsin, I think the first night we stopped at Wisconsin Dells. That seems to be in the back of my mind, and it's a big vacation spot in Wisconsin, campground area. And so I think that's where we spent the first night. But from then on, we went on up into International Falls, which is right here in the border between Canada and the US and northern Minnesota. Now, going up through Minnesota, there was a sign at the side of the road, and we stopped there because the scoutmaster had checked this all out beforehand, and I don't verify the truth of what I'm going to say to you. I cannot. But we got out of the cars, we walked about a quarter of a mile across a field, and we came to a spot where there was a spring of water bubbling up out of the ground and forming a little trickle away. And the sign posted there, this is the northernmost point of the Mississippi River. And all of us scouts stood there and we went, ah! And I can now say to you folks that I have walked across the Mississippi River. So we went on from here at International Falls up to Winnipeg, Brandon, Regina, through. This is Ontario, this is Winnipeg. We went through, oh, my mind has gone blank, Saskatchewan and Idaho. And we got to a town right about up here, just south of Calgary, that is called Banff. And the name is spelled B-A-N-F-F. And it is probably one of the most beautiful spots that Joanne and I have ever seen. She and I went there later to see it because I was so impressed with it. It's a beautiful little town. There is a lake called Lake Louise right outside of town. And it is, in all of my travels, Europe, Asia, Africa, whatever, I have never seen a lake that I thought was more beautiful than Lake Louise. It was ice water lake from the snowmelt. It was absolutely perfectly clear. It was so cold that nothing would grow in it, nor would fish live in it. And the local authority would not permit any boat that had a motor on it in case there was an oil or gasoline leak. And it just sat there in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. It was perfectly beautiful. And it was a high point for me. Well, from there, which is right about here, we came down into Glacier National Park. And yes, I walked out onto a glacier and looked down a crevasse and said, oh my Lord, that's a long way down. Then from there, we came on down into Wyoming, right about here, and went to Yellowstone National Park. And Yellowstone, the famous Old Faithful, did its thing right on time. I could smell the sulfur from the bubbling mud pots that are there. And yes, I saw stupid people feeding bears when all the signs said, don't feed the bears. But from there, then, we left Wyoming and into South Dakota. Now, South Dakota has a national park called Black Hills National Park, and I have never seen a more desolate area than that part of South Dakota. It just is There's nothing grows there, there's nothing but rock and dust and what have you, except there is one thing. We got out of the cars in the Black Hills National Park and met a ranger. And the ranger said, "Come on with me, guys." And so we, group of 8 and 2 scoutmasters, followed him, and we came to a spot, and he said, "Now look, see that hill over there?" And we all looked. He said, "Yes." 200 Indians and Cochise were behind that hill. And he said, "You see that hill?" "Yeah." 300 Navajo and an Indian chief were behind. And he proceeded to document every place around the spot where we were standing. And when he got through doing that, he said, "Now, this, as close as we can find out, is exactly where General Custer made his last stand." And again, this was American history. Even I knew about it from English. Of course, I was seeing Errol Flynn in the movie, but nevertheless, to see the actual spot was really an impressive thing to me. Well, from there, we moved on, heading for Detroit, and we came down through about to here, just outside of Omaha, and we stopped at a town, and I have a picture to show you. Each year, the people of this town have a convention center, and they decorate the convention center. And every year the decoration is different. Go on, there you are. So if you'll pass this to the gentleman behind you. This is called the Corn Palace of Mitchell, South Dakota. Every spot on the outside of that building is covered with corn. The whole thing is corn. Corn kernels, corn cobs, corn stalks, corn leaves, corn hair, everything is corn dyed to fit. And we thoroughly enjoyed seeing that, and again, Joanne and I have taken the boys to see that particular building. So from there, we continued on back to Detroit, and at that point, I guess I can say that I felt I had actually come to America. So, thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them for you. Yeah.
Sure. My